The horror genre historically hasn't been a favourite of critics, with many firm genre favourites taking years to find their audience and being revered as the classics they are. The Thing, Jennifer's Body and Event Horizon didn't fare well critically or commercially following their premieres, but in time, these gems eventually found their audience, elevating them to cult classic status. However, there are a few frightful features that never received the recognition they deserved. The most heart-thumping flicks can sink without a trace due to poor marketing or coming out at the wrong time. As Halloween 3 Season of the Witch proved, an entry in a recognised IP can be hated purely because it went in a different direction. Bold decisions like these don't always pan out, but such films will always have their defenders for going against the grain. Today, the Tommy Lee Wallace directed film is revered as one of the Halloween franchise's best entries, a status that took decades to reach. Even when these types of criticisms are warranted, it doesn't mean these infamous horrors are without merit. Negative consensus can have an obliterative effect, causing moviegoers to forget about a given film's redeemable qualities, or consider the possibility that a film isn't worth dismissing out of pocket, as is the case with the following films. With that in mind, I'm Sean Verdict for What Culture Horror, and here are 10 horror movie flops that are worth revisiting. Number 10, The Keep. Michael Mann's The Keep had everything going against it. The special effects supervisor, Wally Weavers, died before completing his work, which led to numerous delays. Despite being intended as a 3+ hour epic, the studio chopped it down to 96 minutes, turning The Keep into a convoluted mess. As such, it wasn't a surprise when it received mixed reviews and failed to break even. The plot, or at least what's left of it in the final cut, centers around a squad of Nazi soldiers who are forced to work with a Jewish historian after awaking a demonic power. Even though the characterization is minute, the tremendous cast, which includes Ian McKellen, Gabriel Byrne and Scott Glenn, elevates the campy narrative. With almost 2 hours cut from the original version, the narrative has been left disjointed and clunky. However, The Keep gets away with it since it feels like a sensory overload experience, more so than a movie. Mann himself referred to The Keep as a visual and sonic fairy tale, and with its Tangerine Dream soundtrack and masterful set design, it's easy to see why. Even though retrospective reviews have been more positive, The Keep has yet to develop the cult following it deserves. Number 9, Creepshow 2. Creepshow is a horror anthology based on the comic book of the same name. With George Romero helming the project and Stephen King writing the script, the gory bonanza sounded like a match made in heaven, or hell in this case. After Creepshow's success, a sequel was released 5 years later. Although critics looked upon the original favourably, they tore the second entry a new one, criticising it for an apparent lack of imagination and scares. Creepshow 2 was also considered a diminished offering, since it only contained 3 spooky tales, while its predecessor had 5. However, this decision arguably works in the movie's favour, as there's more time to flesh out the characters, build tension, and explore each grisly idea. The minuscule budget didn't stop the filmmakers from concocting some spectacular set pieces and gloriously over-the-top kills. The standout story has to be The Raft, which centres around a lake blob with a taste for human flesh. Despite resembling a garbage bag doused in oil, this chapter is riveting thanks to the lively pace, magnificent melting effects, and nerve-shredding atmosphere. It doesn't capture the same spark as its predecessor, but Creepshow 2 is a solid follow-up. Number 8, Death Watch. Soldiers during World War I had their hands full on the battlefield, dealing with enemy battalions, bombs, exhaustion, starvation, unruly allies, and shell shock. But in M.J. Bassett's Death Watch, British Private Charlie and his troop have to contend with another threat: ghosts. At first, the concept sounds silly, but when German soldiers surrender because they're too afraid to stay in their haunted trenches, it demonstrates how terrifying these spirits are. Just to add to the mounting problems, Charlie's unstable comrade, Private Quinn, played by a scene-chewing Andy Serkis, begins bludgeoning, shooting, and crucifying anyone who rubs him the wrong way. He's such a sick son of a bitch, viewers will be keen to keep watching, hoping Quinn receives the most brutal comeuppance imaginable. Mild spoiler, he does. Speaking of which, the violence is thoroughly gag-inducing, especially during the climax. Watching soldiers being skewered by barbed wire or having their feet devoured by rats is sure to test anyone's nerves. Upon its release, Death Watch came and went without much fanfare, but upon a revisit, there's no doubt the paranormal war flick deserves more praise. Number 7, Scream 3. Scream 3 is often touted as the black sheep of Wes Craven's slasher saga due to its formulaic and cliched plot. Although the gratuitous cameos and meta gags are funny, they come across as desperate and distracting. However, the threequel's so-called pitfalls can be viewed as strengths. When a franchise keeps pumping out sequels for the sake of it, it isn't long before studios rely on preposterous storylines and lame gimmicks. Being renowned for its meta-humor, it's fairly on brand when Scream 3's Ghostface turns out to be Sidney Prescott's secret half-brother, Roman. Also, revealing that Roman orchestrated the death of Sidney's mother in the first installment is exactly the type of a needless retcon that a horror IP would cook up once the creative juices dried up. Basically, it's smart writing disguised as dumb writing to make fun of dumb writing, buttressed by the excellent Parker Posey, whose performance as actress Jennifer Jolie proves to be a franchise highlight. Scream 3 has also proven to be disturbingly relevant in the way it explores the sleaziness of Hollywood, addressing the background of Sidney's mother and how she was abused by producers before her death. Scream 3 isn't a masterpiece, but it's unfair to classify it as a dud, particularly when it also gives Sidney such a hopeful ending. Number 6. Cube 2 Hypercube. The original Cube revolves around a group of strangers navigating through a constantly shifting labyrinth that's filled with booby traps. At first, Vincenzo Natali's psychological thriller went under the radar. However, Cube was destined to develop a cult following thanks to its mind-bending premise, creative gore, sharp writing, and nerve-wracking tension. Most importantly, there was plenty more to explore, since the first movie barely scratched the surface of how the titular prison came to be. Luckily, it looked like answers would be given when a sequel was announced. Instead, Cube 2 Hypercube went in a completely different direction. This time around, a band of strangers awaken in a tesseract that exists outside time and space. While trying to escape, they have to contend with rapid aging, vortexes, distorted gravity, encountering their past and future selves, and time dilation. Even though Hypercube delivered another otherworldly experience, it ticked off a lot of people, since they were no closer to understanding the Cube's origins. However, it could be argued that the sequel made the right move. Rather than diluting the mystery that defined the original, Hypercube devised another bonkers idea that left everybody scratching their head. Even though the prequel Cube Zero explored the maze's origins, kind of, it felt like more of the same. Hypercube, on the other hand, was one of a kind. Number 5. Child's Play 2019. Rather than retreading the same story as before, Lars Klevberg's Child's Play took a more tech-centric approach. Instead of making the villain a doll with the soul of a serial killer, Chucky was revised into a high-tech toy that goes haywire after his safety protocols are deactivated. Serving as a satire on the digital era and the dangers of AI, the do-over could have revitalized the flagging franchise. But after receiving mixed reviews, the remake was swept under the rug. This is a pity, since 2019's Child's Play is arguably better than the original. The tone is campy without feeling OTT. The jump scares are delightfully effective, and the kills are impressively brutal. Even though Brad Dourif seems irreplaceable as the maniacal doll, Mark Hamill's Chucky is surprisingly layered, switching from protective to psychotic in an instant. One of the major positives is how Chucky is depicted in a sympathetic light. He slays Andy's enemies, not out of malice, but in a warped attempt to protect him. When he sees Andy enjoying a horror movie, it's understandable how an artificially intelligent machine like Chucky drew the conclusion that violence would bring his owner joy. At the time, the climax seemed ridiculous, with Chucky hacking other machines to attack on his behalf. But with AI advancing at an astronomical rate in recent years, that sequence isn't that far-fetched anymore. Number 4. Underwater. Rather than going for the slow burn approach, Underwater dives into the action straight away. In the opening scene, an immense earthquake strikes a deep water research facility, urging mechanical engineer Nora Price, played by Kristen Stewart, to evacuate through the escape pod. It may sound ludicrous to open the movie with the protagonist skidding down flooded corridors like a slip and slide, but it's a dynamic way to kickstart the story. And when the ensemble realise they're 7 miles below the surface and they're not alone, Underwater is sure to have the audience's undivided attention. One aspect that really enhances the claustrophobia is the sound effects. Every time a pipe bursts or a girder grinds, the crew are reminded they're under 1 trillion tons of water, which can crush them at any moment. And once the creepy crawlies get introduced, things go from bad to absolute hell in an instant. Number 3. The Ruins. In this adaptation of Scott Smith's novel, Amy and her friends travel to Mexico, hoping to explore a secluded temple. After being shot at by the locals, the group heads to the temple's peak for safety. Unfortunately, Amy realizes they are in mortal danger when they awaken something sinister within the ancient structure. Unlike the source material, this adaptation failed to win over critics. It's a shame, since The Ruins crams in an astonishing amount of visceral tension and gruesome violence in its 90-minute runtime. Although it's clear clear what the big bad threat is, the tactics it utilizes to manipulate its prey are extremely inventive and gross. Also, gorehounds will be having a field day with this movie. The sequences involving amputation, protruding bones, and self-mutilation are enough to test the biggest advocates of the genre. With that said, The Ruins prioritizes atmosphere over violence. Even when the ensemble is not in direct danger, the looming threat is ever present. Also, the characters are surprisingly sympathetic, even when they behave callously. When Amy's friends consider abandoning their party to die, their dilemma is understandable since they're facing a foe they don't understand. The Ruins doesn't reinvent the wheel by any stretch of the imagination, but it delivers everything it's set out to do. Number 2. Halloween Kills. Skepticism behind 2018's Halloween was fair, considering it was directed by the man behind Your Highness. However, David Gordon Green's sequel reinvigorated John Carpenter's revolutionary franchise in a way that's never been seen before. Too bad the follow-up didn't have the same impact. Although Halloween Kills garnered plenty of criticism, the main issue was the fact Michael Myers doesn't interact with Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie Strode at all. But this observation isn't necessarily a bad thing. As has been established in 2018's Halloween, this incarnation of Michael isn't related to Laurie, much like the original. By discarding the sibling connection, Michael's murder spree is more terrifying since it highlights how he's driven by instinct rather than personal feelings. For this reason, Michael feels more like an agent of chaos than a serial killer, especially after he racks up an astonishing 30+ kills. Also, Michael's lack of connection with Laurie completely changes her motivation. Even though she's no longer a target, she goes out of her way to stop him, not out of self-preservation, but to protect the people of Haddonfield. And when compared to the sequel Halloween Ends, Kills doesn't seem that bad. Number 1. Pandorum. Pandorum earned less than half its budget back, was shredded by critics, and bankrupted its studio. On a financial and critical level, the spacefaring thriller was a complete failure. But as a movie, Christian Alvart's futuristic horror is a total knockout. In Pandorum, mankind has been sent out on an intergalactic arc to locate an Earth-like planet, with the intention of restarting the human race. During the century-long journey, 2 astronauts inexplicably awake from hypersleep, suffering from amnesia and psychosis. While trying to make sense of the situation, they discover their vessel has been hijacked by someone or something. Although the disemboweling invaders are deeply intimidating, the biggest problem the main characters have to deal with lies in their own head. With their minds rapidly deteriorating, the duo finds themselves combating their own thoughts and each other more than the physical threat. This human conflict keeps the story feeling grounded and personal, even though the characters are a million light years from Earth fighting God knows what. It may have been torn apart on its release, but there's no doubt Pandorum is out of this world.